to the Gaze. I'm glad to be with you on a digital platform of New Europe platform, where we will show you all the significant events in different regions that at the end of the day affect the world globally, and we will speak about it with our experts for you. I'm Ksenia Smirnova, and it's my show Talk for More Details. And today we will speak about the European Union summit of European Union leaders and leaders from the regional bloc of Latin American and Caribbean states. And we will talk about this with our member of the European Parliament, Petras Auštrevičius. Nice to meet you. Thank you for your time for our project.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I want to start with a little more detailed information before we continue to discuss it. The leaders of Europe reaffirm their support for Ukraine. The peace formula of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky support the idea of holding a peace summit and are ready to help to organize it. The conclusions were adopted in Brussels at the European Union leaders meeting. They condemned the deliberate destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, which led to an environmental disaster and now threatens the safety of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and are concerned about the slowdown in the implementation of the grain deal. The main discussion on the topic of Ukraine were long because the conclusions on them were published at almost 2 a.m. I note Ukraine is not yet a member of the European Union, but almost all countries at this summit represented its interests. So I want to start with the quote of Mr. Borrell, Josep Borrell. So he said afterwards, the military support to Ukraine has to be for the long haul. Borrell told reporters, suggesting the European Union could establish Ukrainian defense fund models on the peace facilities. So my question is, many options for security guarantees for Ukraine already we have, but there were few specifics or details during this time. So do you see these specifics and details in the statements or maybe in concrete actions that we will see in the near future?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there is no question anymore as such among the European leaders, probably except one or two, I mean, I would not mention by names, who probably would abstain repeating it in public. But for the rest of the European leadership, it's really clear that we have to stand with Ukraine and assist Ukraine as long as it takes. And this is a very important, by the way, statement. It means that the West, the European Union, is ready, I mean, for a long-term support of Ukraine. Of course, I mean, it means money. We have to think where the money will come from. I mean, which parts of our budget. But this long-term commitment for victory of Ukraine, because I mean the second part is about victory, and there is no question, I mean, that we support Ukraine not just to continue a war. I mean, we support Ukraine for Ukraine to achieve a victory, to liberate its own territory, I mean, up to the internationally recognized borders. And I mean, the third element is that we're not going, I mean, to push Ukraine for any political deal or peace talks, settlements, as long as Ukraine didn't agree. I mean, it must come under the Ukrainian terms. So we are not masters in this regard. And I believe those elements I mentioned, and probably there are some more, but nevertheless, it's a strong, kind of common understanding among the European leadership as well as politicians in order to support Ukraine as much as it takes.
In terms of actual defense of Ukrainian cities, especially when we see each night the missile attacks on the civilians' infrastructure, again and again, our president and our government repeat that we need help with the F-16s. Ukraine will be able, with these flight jets, to defend Ukrainian cities from Russian missile terror in more effective way and advance on the battlefields more rapidly, as well with other other military help. So what may speed up this process? And initiative is still from Ukrainian side. What stops or galvanize the decisions from our partners at the ally?
You know, I have a hope, and my assessment is it's not because the West or the Western leaders still believe in any, kind of change in Russian behavior. I mean, it was such a sentiment probably in the beginning of this war of aggression against Ukraine. Some still believed that having one more phone conversation with Putin, you can change the course of the war. It's gone. I don't see it anymore. I mean, a repetition of those kind of even political mistakes, I would call it. But maybe there are some technicalities, important technicalities, which are not broadly reported to the wide public. Why it is so? Why F-16 is not yet in the skies above Ukraine? Why the Ukrainian pilots? Why it takes so long? To start training of the Ukrainian pilots as soon as possible, and not just in one country, but maybe in more than one country, in order to prepare as many as it needed. I mean, once the F-16 will be supplied, I see certain delay, as well as with the training of the Ukrainian forces. I think the European Union could start it even in 22, in the second part of 22. It was clear that, once you give weapons and Ukrainian army uses different tactics, new approach, you need to train people. To act in kind of interconnected with the modern sets or modern weaponry. So that's why I regret this delay. I really believe that will be no major time gap between talks about F-16 and delivery. This is important. I see a sign of agreement that the West needs to provide F-16 and more. F-16 is not the final, and Ukraine needs a lot of new modern ammunition and weaponry. So that's why let's be open-minded, and Ukraine must be supplied as with many new weapons as it needs to win against the much bigger army. So that's why only by modern weapons and on timely supplied modern weapons, Ukraine might achieve a victory we're speaking about.
Resuming the summit we are discussing with you right now, international media mentions France as a champion of greater security and defense role for the European Union. Proposed the text, diplomats said, but it was amended to accommodate concerns from military neutral countries and from staunch supporters of transatlantic cooperation, such as the Baltic states, who see European security as mainly a matter for NATO with a strong US role. So my question is, new fears and accuracy within the European Union, we see again, in which individual countries will this affect? Hungary again? Sorry, but it's always actual.
It's okay. If we agree on one major provision as Europe must be not a security consumer but provider, I'm in favor of giving the European Union more powers in this regard, asking the European Union to invest more into defense and to have kind of coordination of efforts, industries, research and development in the field of defense. But it will take time for the European Union to be defense sufficient. We're not defense and security sufficient for the time of being, and aggression of Russia is the best example of this. So that's why we shouldn't, try to increase any instability because of our political considerations. And that's why we have to stay in a closest possible cooperation with NATO. NATO and our transatlantic bond is, I would say, decisively important. And in coming years, between of us, I don't see any decrease of transatlantic relations for European security. So that's why now we have to combine and to use this transatlantic security concept as much as possible, asking the European partners to assume more responsibilities. Because, for the time of being, we have no enough investments, we have no enough of power, and we have no enough of production. So that's why, it will take time. Things might change, hopefully for better. And Ukraine is a great example, as Ukraine's army for the time of being is one of the most powerful in Europe. And with such a fresh experience, many of European armies have nothing, in a close horizon to compare with Ukraine. So that's why we have to learn from those very, heavy, I would say, examples, but not to try to imitate so-called stability, having no stability at all.
I want to stress again towards our government, and our president always repeats in his speeches towards the politicians of the world, for the period before NATO membership, Ukraine suggests implementing our proposals on the security guarantees. It's called Kyiv Security Compact. They cannot replace or substitute for Ukraine's membership in NATO, but will guarantee Ukraine's security until full membership in the alliance, which has no alternative. So again, my question, what guarantees we may receive before this long-term awaiting to join NATO?
This is a very important question. And I think it was a very good attempt, to create this Kyiv Compact, which was produced by good experts in defense and security field. What kind of security guarantees Ukraine needs and we can provide? Let's start from financial and economic guarantees of supporting financially, supporting economically, and by investments of the state of Ukraine. And Ukraine needs a lot of this kind of fiscal support, even in cash, for withstanding huge losses because of the Russian destructive war, as well as decrease in economic potential of Ukraine. So I see it a very part of our security guarantees, as long as it takes. On the other hand, it's not enough. So we have to mobilize our defense industries. We have to mobilize our even societies, I have to admit, to support militarily and in humanitarian way as much as it needed. And finally, I think there should be some bilateral guarantees from some member states or group of member states towards Ukraine, as that support for Ukraine will be increasing. I don't see any possibility to apply so-called Article 5 by even bilateral guarantees, but coming up closer and closer to de facto membership, I think this kind of support, military support, is so essential. And we shouldn't restrict ourselves speaking about weaponry. Of course, we're not touching upon the issue of nuclear and so on. These are out of our considerations. But the rest, everything should be on a plate. and everything must be available for Ukraine if we are serious about security guarantees. And I'm not naive. I don't think the Ukrainian side, the President Zelensky, will agree on those so-called security guarantees if they are not really effective, if they are only based on words and good wishes.
If not Article 5, there's always Article 4, as I remember talking to the representatives of American Politicum. So they told me that this might be used and the Ukraine can take part in the discussions. But the precedent of this case should be something terrible. The disaster with Kakhovska Dam is not enough to use the Article 4. Maybe Zaporizhia power plants can be the... I don't want to talk about this, but what should be the events here in Ukraine to use the 4th article of NATO status?
I think we have to speak about this the sooner the better. We have to have Ukrainians around the table, and the Ukrainian opinion, the Ukrainian position is and must be increasingly decisive on the Western decisions. I don't see any alternative about this. Not just about praising the Ukrainian militaries, but the decisions which are taken by Ukraine and foreseen must be known. These decisions must be discussed, shared, and the Western response to great extent and increasingly must be based on Ukraine's assessment. I think to foresee a certain turn of events in Ukraine, only Ukrainians can do it in the best way. I think we don't have much of capacity to replace Ukrainian position. So that's why those consultations and new forums, by the way, for consultations must be really established. So that's why Vilnius Summit must be a gate opener in this regard. And we have to come with something more, not less in this regard.
One more effective hopefully effective tool is sanctions. And it's been 11 packages already, but still we are waiting the 12th one. And in this regard, I want to remember the words of our president before the start of the summit in Brussels. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, addressed the leaders of the European Union via video link. The president of Ukraine called for intensifying the fight against Russian military aggression, emphasizing that right now the country and its leader are weaker than ever. Confrontation and conflicts are tearing the Kremlin apart from the inside, and this should be used to achieve peace in Ukraine. Let's hear Volodymyr Zelensky.
Many of missiles that Russian terrorists are now using against life in Ukraine are newly produced and contain critical components made by companies in the free world. This cannot be tolerated. Together we must stop Russia's use of free world technologies for aggression against freedom. We also cannot tolerate what Russia is doing to our Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Let me remind you that this is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Russian terrorists have mined it, and we have specific information from our intelligence, and we have presented it in particular to diplomats of European countries, as well as information about Russia's use of foreign parts for missile production. The Russian nuclear industry deserves sanctions in response to Russian radiation blackmail.
Yet he added, it is important not to pause in the sanctions, so the less the less pauses there are, the less Russia will adapt to the pressure on it, and the less it will come up with ways to circumvent the sanctions. So in this regard, I want to ask you, what are the instruments of sanctions could be as much effective in the 12th package to cut off Putin's military ambitions and in fact to build with all these sanctions materials, the rockets and missiles that destroy our cities?
In fact, I consider sanctions against Russia, taken by the West, as indeed very effective measure. Maybe there are some loopholes and there is some delay in between of adopting each and every next package of sanctions, but let's be serious. We have to concentrate on more, expanding, deepening, and as you rightly said, trying to avoid any circumvention of sanctions, because what we notice now, third countries got really deeply involved in circumvention of sanctions. So that's why the 11th package was mostly about the ban of export goods to third countries suspected in circumventing sanctions. And this is very serious, because I think it was self-deceiving decision of European Union we impose on Russia, but some neighbors who are very willing partners, especially some private and even state businesses, they started to take over the exports from European Union and sending back to Russia. So I think the decisions already taken are on the right way. By the way, you mentioned those technologies, and President explicitly mentioned, indeed, there is a new ban on further 15 technological items which were found on the battlefield. Imagine. It's hard to explain to people whose children and close associates are killed by those missiles. So that's why we have to continue monitoring situation, especially from third countries. EU sanctions are not exterritorial. We don't ask third countries mandatory to follow our sanctions, but we should not let our items with the dual use, with the technologically advanced technologies, with those things which are so needed for this bloody Putin's regime to range attacks against Ukraine, not letting them to come to Russia via third countries. So that's why the 11th sanctions package, it's okay. It took too long. That I completely agree with you. The 12th sanctions package is already in preparation. Will be definitely 12 and maybe even more next one. And this will be again about circumvention, because we didn't, empty all the tools we have to employ against those sanctions breakers from third countries. We have to probably to check, does the 11th sanctions package produce results we expect, and to further close loopholes, because we move forward, but Kremlin and Kremlin's partners in neighborhood, they are smart enough. They think same minute. We impose sanctions about some possibilities to escape.
It's interesting about these third countries, because everybody knows the title of these countries. Who are they? Everybody knows. But still is the question, what makes them so strong to risk and circumvent these sanctions, dealing with Russia? And the other question is, we know that maybe there's an instrument to affect especially these concrete, to make a focus on these countries, not as a whole. Let's make sanctions towards third countries, but concrete countries. For example, countries that buy an unrealistic amount of goods for transit and allegedly through their territory to Russia, or selling undercover consumer goods containing components for the military complex. So everybody, you know, we journalists know, but still they know that we know, and still they're risky to cooperate with Russia. First question, why there's so confidence? And the second question, why not to focus on special countries and deal with them with sanctions?
Well, let's start from the beginning. You know, I mean, if you look at the list of entities which cover entities registered in China, Uzbekistan, United Arab Emirates, Syria and Armenia, next to Iran, okay? And if you look at the list of those countries, I wouldn't say, I mean, they are all equally dependent on Russia, that Russia has same impact on those countries' policies. Some are politically dependent on Russia. Some are security-wise dependent on Russia. Some are simply making a good profit out of those, dealings and reselling technologies we don't want. I mean, Russia would get it, okay? And each and every case is a bit specific, but there is a dependence, what Russia explores, and simply use those, channels through third countries. So we have to understand the geopolitical, impact of Russia on those countries, and especially those I mentioned to you a minute ago. Secondly, what the European Union started to do, having a special representative for sanctions policy, Mr. Sullivan, he already made many bilateral visits, meeting, coming to capitals, talking to people, and I hope explaining what could be the consequences if this circumvention, is further used by those countries or countries' entities. I mean, I don't care. I mean, for me, it's most important which channel, which territory it goes and gets into the Russian hands. So that's why I think we have to use our bilateral relations. We have to be more serious. And it probably shouldn't be only Mr. Sullivan going to those capitals, but High Representative Mr. Borrell and some ministers and high officials from EU capitals as well, sending very serious not a threatening, but reminding what kind of a consequence it will have for our bilateral relations. And all of those countries are dependent on EU in one way or another. So for me, it's a very powerful mean.
I think very powerful is as a support of the people of European countries when they understand what's really going on in Ukraine. And it depends on what information they get. And sometimes the Russian propaganda still gets through to their heads. And therefore, I want to remember that in the 11th package of sanctions, there are restrictions to several additional TV channels. The European Union Council extended the suspension of broadcasting licenses to 5 more media that are directly or indirectly controlled by the Russian Federation and are used for manipulative representation of information. And in this regard, I want to ask you, despite the closure of official propaganda channels, it is still breaks through to Western countries. So how to stop these alternative methods of propaganda? I mean, through cultural organization, fake experts that speak throughout television in different countries. And in Baltic countries as well, as I understand, this problem is painful too. So how to counter for this?
If I see a progress which we have achieved and advancing our understanding, as you rightly said, about the dangers of foreign interference, propaganda, and disinformation, it's like a day and night. The understanding in the European Union, especially in the European Parliament, we had some 3-4 years ago. It's nothing to compare what kind of common position we have now. It's a great progress, but it's not enough. The Russian propaganda or hostile propaganda, even from other third countries. I don't exclusively focus only on the Russian one. I don't think the Chinese propaganda in this regard is favorable for us either. So that's why through social media, we have to ask those platforms which operate social media to be more effective. It's not about censorship, but more effective in not letting that propaganda get to the heads and to the homes of Europeans, Western Europeans in particular. Because, it takes time for people to realize to what extent propaganda is a great political challenge and risk for a normal society. So that's why I think we have to work further on in this regard. We have approved next report on foreign interference, as well as limiting influence on political system of Europe. Not long ago, European political parties, some political parties were financed by Russia and other authoritarian regimes. It's a great danger. We shouldn't be naive in this regard. So that's why I see a good progress. I sense increasing understanding among the European politicians, but we have no right, to stop where we are. We have to, overtake sometimes new technological means what are employed by those authoritarian regimes and Russians in particular.
And at the end of our discussion, I want to discuss, of our conversation, I want to discuss one more thing. It's a human factor and sometimes ruling irrationally by emotions. So that's why people more and more use artificial intelligence to find an answer to their questions. So do we? We ask GPT chat, and so here's the answer for the very interesting question. So should some we asked our GPT chats, should some countries use the army if economic sanctions against the enemy do not work? So decision to use the army, that's the answer, or military force as a response to an international conflict, particularly when economic sanctions have proven ineffective, is a complex and sensitive issue that should be carefully considered. It involves various factors, including the nature of the conflict, the potential consequences of the military action, and the desired long-term outcomes. And before resorting to military force, it is essential for countries to exhaust all diplomatic, economic, and political options available to resolve the conflict peacefully. Economic sanctions can have significant impacts on a country's economy and its people, but they may take time to yield results and can also cause unintended humanitarian consequences. So we discussed sanctions, but what about all the instruments of diplomacy? How do you think? Do we still have some options? We in Ukraine and our partners?
I hope we do. Of course, based on the international law, based on jurisdiction of the United Nations, there must be at least discussions and understanding once we analyze one or another situation. But, why the European Union is speaking and thinking and doing good things in terms of a rapid reaction force. So we have to have this instrument as ultimate protection of our interests and interests of those third countries. Because sometimes, we have to come to the help of those countries in a very short period of time. I think we have a bit different now understanding and analysis about the threat coming from countries far away to our neighborhood. I think we've been too, lenient reading the situation even in Syria. Now analyzing situation in Northern Africa. And who knows, how close it might come, next time to us, even using some hybrid, means of increasing risk, like, illegal migration means and weaponizing migration and so on and so forth. So that's why, yes, we have to have a clear, standing, ready, efficient military force to protect our interests, to protect our partners. And I look at the situation in Ukraine as well. As one of the, territory, one of the situation where we can be in one way or another. What kind of the force it might be, it's the next question. But I don't close doors to any possibility for the European Union to be more involved in assisting Ukraine fighting this illegal aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine.
The most important vision at the end of our program from GPT chat, according to what you say, we got this one. So I just quote, if economic sanctions have failed to achieve the desired objectives and the situation poses a significant threat to a country, security or the security of its allies, some countries may consider military intervention as a last resort. However, it is crucial to ensure that such action complies with international law, is proportionate to the threat and has a clear and achievable mission. In this regard, I want to again stress on the situation on Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So what can be this main meaning for such decision?
I'm looking forward for a final report from the International Atomic Agency. It's so important. The Atomic Agency confirms those, risks which were already, declared by the Ukrainian side as the nuclear power facility is mined, full of kind of explosive material. We need, to have independent confirmation. So that's why the access of the Atomic Agency experts must be provided by the Russian side. And I believe, the International Atomic Agency has a lot of means of influence on the Russian side. Probably not all of them are used. So that's why it's very serious situation. And, I don't think, we should, start, analyzing now technologically what kind of consequences it might have. But I'm looking forward for more, streamlined policy line from the Atomic Agency experts and the leadership. And of course, we have to assist them with everything possible, with every support, every financial possibility we provide this agency in order to achieve what this agency is for. Safety in nuclear installations. So this is the ultimate task of the International Atomic Agency, and Russia must bear responsibility. The sooner the better.
It's still unbelievable. You complete to say that's very difficult situation, very, very hard situation and very frightening situation, because you're representative of Baltic countries and our Poland neighbors and those who live close to the border of Ukraine understand all these serious consequences that can be if something happens on this power plant. But still, the countries of Western Europe, maybe not so sure about the complex that will follow the destroyment of this power plant. And more of this, for me, it's interesting why Rafael Grossi, the representative of the main agency that has the access to this power plant, still okay. I mean, yes, there are some minings, but there's just for defense. For defense of whom? Of who? From whom? Can you explain it?
Well, I think this is mainly not about probably atomic agency capacity to perform this analysis or to proclaim the situation as it is. You know, I still think that some politicians and countries are partly taken by this kind of illusion that you can talk to Russia and the Russian side will understand so-called red lines, which can't be crossed. I myself, I don't. I mean, I think Russians are ready for many red lines might be crossed if they want, okay? But, I mean, it depends. What is your reaction and when this reaction starts? I mean, when we built up a new defense wall, a new kind of position and asking for those sanctions or any actions to be taken from our side. If we will follow and we will be, doomed and deceived by, so to say, peaceful Russian attitude or cooperative attitude, of course, we will fail. So let's forget about naivety and let's use all existing, channels of pressure, access to the Zaporizhia nuclear power station as soon as possible. I mean, so many lives maybe depend on the situation. So that's why I don't see any chance for any games continued with Russians.
Yeah, radiation doesn't choose people for their nationality. Thank you very much for your proactive position, and thank you very, very much for your strong support. Thank you. And I will remind our audience that our guest was a member of the European Parliament. It's Petras Auštrevičius. And I'm glad to present my next guest. It's Bohdan Ferens, Doctor of Political Science. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I want to start our conversation with the next information. In 2023, Ukraine received $23.6 billion of partners' microfinancial assistance. Recently, the state budget of Ukraine has received the second tranche under the extended fund facility from the International Monetary Fund, totaling $890 million to cover priority expenditures. The economic support of partners is one of the elements of Ukraine's resilience, as it allows us to finance non-military budget expenditures, including social obligations of the state, said Denis Shmyhal. The largest contribution from received $23.6 billion was made by the European Union, the United States, Canada, and the IMF. The Prime Minister thanked partners for their solidarity and willingness to support our struggle for independence and our plans to rebuild the country. So my first question, Bohdan, will be, as a result, who should help in restoring the depleted infrastructure? After all, initially it was about money from Russia Federation and the withdrawal of frozen accounts of the Russian state and individual sanctioned figures. Is the recovery mechanism clear for you, or is it all on paper mostly and hypothetical?
I think that now we are in the process just for not only establishment, but implementing the recovery just approaches in the context of using financial aid from our partners to help the people in need, with the first priority, especially internally displaced persons. And I think that in London, it was a conference on recovery. It was a strong message that, okay, we Ukrainians understand that for our partners, it's not only easy also to just support us, usually financial, for these purposes, but we asked our partners when you will decide. And first of all, it's necessary to have a political decision to use the Russian frozen assets in the context of transferring to Ukraine and using this for recovery processes, for rebuilding, for building new infrastructure, for schools, for universities, for hospitals. That's why I think we should work using two tracks. The first one, of course, this kind of financial aid that we are now receiving. We have to show the best practices and best examples, successful examples in implementing the pilot projects. With infrastructure or with other issues, because it's not only about the context of building or rebuilding. It is also the recovery of human capital, human capacity. And after this, we should work using our political channels to persuade our partners just to use Russian frozen assets. I think two main priorities should be just on our track.
There are lots of quarrelings about what has to be first. It's civil infrastructure, like you said right now. And what will we do with the manufacturers or fabrics that were destroyed? And the other question, we have a lot of cities, the small towns that were completely destroyed. So we have to renew the infrastructure that was before this destroyment, or we have to plan something modern, something more necessary for this region, not to restore, but to start and building from the very beginning?
I think build back better, this kind of approach and slogan is the best. That we have to differentiate every region, and have to just provide and to prepare the mapping of different categories of manufacturing, for example, because as you mentioned, just some towns and some cities, unfortunately, were destroyed by Russians, especially on the east of Ukraine with heavy industry. And now it's not possible to just rebuild. And maybe in the future, it will not have a sense just to do this that way as it has been done. That's why I think that we as a country and our government should just prepare this kind of plan, because our European partners, by the way, they just are waiting for this plan of the first track recovery, when we can just, in which we can just use the pilots for some kind, not only critical infrastructure rebuilding, but also with a focus on the business, small and medium entrepreneurship, because it's also important to support our business environment despite the Russian war. That's why Build Back Better, of course, new approaches, new understanding the mapping of every region, because a lot of things has been changed, and also the concrete successful pilots to persuade our partners to continue the support.
Talking about long-term perspective, we want to understand what companies will provide their resources, not only in money, but in providing job opportunities. Will it be foreigners, or will it be our Ukrainians that lost their job or just want to take part in rebuilding their concrete region or city or town?
I think job creation is the first priority, my personal opinion. By the way, I'm working with Dutch colleagues, for example, Spark organization, well known in different regions of the world. They are just working hardly in the context of job creation, especially with involving young people. And I hope that in Ukraine, this kind of pilots and programs will be much more than now. Because when a person has a job, it's much easier to just to think about the day after today, and to not only expect the aid from our partners, but also just to improve our economic conditions and financial stability. That's why job creation, first priority. After this, social security, the second one, because it's necessary to provide the social security for people in need, especially, as I mentioned, internally displaced people, women, families of our hero soldiers. And also after this small and medium entrepreneurship, it's not so easy for this kind of persons just to develop and to survive during this kind of obstacles that we are facing with Russian war. But anyway, it's our future. And also heavy industry, first of all, and highly technological sector of economy and agricultural sector. This kind of focus will help us to not only to survive, just to develop our economy.
And going back to the short-long perspective, you just said about the concrete help to the families. I mean, maybe it's about relocated people from the destroyed territories. Nowadays, this help that's already on the accounts here in Ukraine, that was provided by this organization I mentioned before. How it works, what's the mechanism, what people or what group of people can afford this help, and in which way?
First of all, as I know, just an approach of, for example, reskilling trainings could be helpful for internally displaced persons, for example, for coal miners, because there are a lot of coal miners from the eastern part of Ukraine that now just unfortunately faced to live in other regions of Ukraine. And they're trying to find themselves in maybe agriculture sphere or in the service sector. That's why the reskilling trainings, for example, or academies can be quite effective from the experience of other countries that starting from the war conflicts. I can say this, but also the support from the government. I mean, as I know, some programs are existing through which it's possible to receive some small grants, but it could be also helpful. And opportunities, I mean, with relocation of the businesses. Now we see this process from the eastern central part of Ukraine, sometimes to the more western regions, more safer regions, but we also can just declare that unfortunately in Ukraine it's difficult to say that some regions are much more safer with this kind of targets from the Russians on Lviv. That's why government support, partner support, because foreign aid, it's not only financial capacity, it's also the distribution of this aid towards the final recipients, and it's necessary to provide this mechanism in appropriate, effective way and in fair way, by the way, with involving of regional actors and also people who are in need.
I want to add some more information and numbers and facts and continue to discuss with you. The Ukrainian government also decided to allocate almost 5.3 billion hryvnias for the recovery in 10 regions. It's Vinnytsia, Dnipropetrovsk, Zhytomyr, Kiev, Kirovograd, Odessa, Poltava, Sumy, Cherkasy, and Chernihiv regions. These funds will be used to implement projects that are critical for communities and directly affects the quality of life. In this situation, I want to ask you, I remember even a year ago was announced the program so-called brother cities, if I'm not mistaken, or sister cities, or, you know, this connection. One city, one country will choose some region in Ukraine and help in restoration. So this is the part of this project, what I just announced, or it's another thing? And what's about this communication? How these brothers and or sister cities find each other? So how this mechanism or instrument works?
I think these dimensions that you mentioned, it's another one, because as I know now, our partners, European partners, they are a little bit changing the approach in this context of regional, how to say, covering and patrolling, using their own efforts to concrete regions. Now, the discussion internally is that maybe we should more focus on some concrete programs, not only on some concrete regions. That's why I'm not sure that our partners will continue this kind of approach with concrete regions and the team. But at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we had the chance to see very successful, I think, cooperation between some regional authorities from Ukraine and of some cities or towns from other countries, I mean, and I helped some kind to establish this kind of context. By the way, yesterday I had the chance to speak with the Committee of Regions of the European Union, and through this Committee of Regions, I mean the institutions that bring together different authorities from the EU member states, they're very interested in supporting at the local level Ukrainian authorities also, and having some common projects. Why it is important? Because it's much more concrete, you know. When some kind of cooperations, for example, between Mykolaiv and, for example, some other city, for example, Rotterdam, because they are quite similar with the Poles and some historical things. I mean, Rotterdam was destroyed after the Second World War, unfortunately, faced this challenge and rebuilt in a very appropriate way. And now Rotterdam is not like a city of port, but a very just modernized city. That's why this kind of communication and cooperation between two cities could be very effective. And I think we should work much more on this. And besides this, we need to have a capacity, by the way, at the local level, in the regional authorities, in the municipalities, because as I know, especially in the pre-frontline regions, it's a big challenge to have an appropriate experts and people who can be just this kind of connectors, you know, between Ukrainian cities and European cities, and effectively can just implement the different projects. That's why we have to educate these people to find the opportunities from our partners to empower local actors, and after this also use foreign partners support just to rebuild and to recover our regional cities.
And at the end of our conversation, I want to try to understand with you together, when our foreign partners say that we will help Ukraine as long as it needs. So when it will be as long, I mean, how they will count when it's enough, when the picture is what they want to see from Ukraine. I mean, the destroyment of our cities are still happening each day and each night. So we cannot count how much money we will need for restoration of our country. So from your point of view, what picture will show our foreign partners that's enough from them to help Ukraine with money to restore a country?
I think it is not only a discussion about money, because sometimes what I can see when our officials just taking part in some kind of conferences like in Lugano, in London, and just shows these presentations with billions and billions of US dollars or euros that we need, I'm not sure that sometimes it's quite effective strategy. I mean, because not all our partners are ready to cover all expenses, you know. let's be honest. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, it's necessary to show that we and to persuade our partners that okay, we need your support, of course, and we can show you the concrete examples how we appropriately use your money to rebuild, for example, some schools, some universities, some hospitals, and to create some businesses in the pre-frontline cities and to create some jobs. In this regard, I think it will be much more easier for politicians abroad also to persuade the citizens and to communicate to their own just people that, okay, we are supporting Ukraine and we can see the practical, real results. But unfortunately, the war is continuing, and it is a main factor that influence on the readiness of our partners to help us more efficiently and with more money, I think.
Still, we have a long way to walk, but as long as I understood from your speech, we know the direction and we have the assistance to help us to pass this road. So thank you very much for your answers. Thank you for your time. I remind our audience that it was Bohdan Ferens, Doctor of Political Sciences. And for now, I say goodbye to you. I'm Ksenia Smirnova, and it was my show Talk. For more details, if you liked the episode, press like button. If you didn't like it, write in the comment why and press the bell to be the first to see the most up-to-date information. And don't forget to subscribe to the Gaze platform on YouTube and our social networks. So thank you for your trust. See you soon.